Yeah, hi guys. I'm Fraser, and I've been doing my masters here at Lincoln over the last wee while, and my talk actually follows on really well from the previous one about black-fronted terns. So yeah, breeding movements and post-breeding dispersal of black-fronted terns in the Mackenzie Basin, which is a fancy way of saying where do they go when they're breeding, and then where do they go when they're not breeding. So yeah, the background's been covered really well. Just in that last talk. So an endemic and endangered species. I say endemic, but just last year, the first ever black-fronted tern away from New Zealand was found in Australia. So a nice wee note there. But yeah, they depend on the South Island's braided rivers for their breeding. And the main threat, as Simon and Bailey said, is introduced mammals. And as such, kind of conservation at the moment is mainly centered around breeding colonies. You can see that it's starting to extend away now, but kind of inhibiting that is there are a couple of quite big knowledge gaps around where the terns go, how far, which habitats they're using, that kind of thing. So to solve that, GPS trackers, so little units that you put on the bird, they're becoming more and more common as technology improves and they get lighter. So they're a really good way, and they're tagged down. Globally, they're used to look at things like habitat use and feeding range. And so that's what we're interested in, along with the migration routes of these birds. So where are they going once they've finished breeding? So this is where the study was based, in the Mackenzie Basin in the Canterbury High Country. So we were tagging birds from two different colonies, from the Cass River by Lake Tekapo, the red dot up there, and then in the upper Oho River down by Twizel by Lake Ruataniwha down there. So two different colonies. And we're using these devices here, GPS tags from a company called Druid. And because the tags are so light, only 2.8 grams, they're not actually hefty enough to house something to transmit the data directly to a satellite or a cell phone network. So it's a two-device system with the nano in the picture there, which goes on the bird, and then a hub device, which sits at the breeding colony. And so the birds fly around, collect their data, and then come back to the colony and transmit it to the hub, which then uploads it to us, where we can view it online. So you can kind of tell when the birds are finished breeding because they're foraging, they keep coming back, and then all things being equal, they'll stop coming back. When breeding's done, you'll stop getting data. After that, you are a bit blind because you have to then go and find the birds with the hub to transmit the data. But while they're breeding, really, really effective. So these are the two hub devices at the Cass River on the left and overlooking the colony at the Oho on the right. That island on the right is known as Tern Island. There's quite a big condensed black-fronted tern colony there. And this is the fieldwork we were doing. So on the left is the trap we were using. So the bird will come along, sit on its eggs, triggers the trap wire, and a kind of a tent structure comes up over the bird and it's inside, which is quite handy because no part of the bird's actually snared or caught. So it's good for welfare. And then on the right is what the end product looks like before we release the bird. So that's the bird with its tracker on its back, it's got little leg loops which go under its legs, so it sits on its back like a backpack. And it's got the wee solar panels you can see there facing up. And this is kind of the data we get. So really good for conference talks because it's a nice medium to kind of present data in. And this is from just one day of data from a bird at the Cass colony. So kind of in the middle there is where the colony is. And then you can see it's flying north and south of the colony to the farmland there, and then up and down the river, basically. So it kind of makes a bit of a cross shape there. And yeah, we'll get to that farmland bit. So yeah, the main thing we found when we actually sat down and looked at the data we got is that the terns were spending the majority of their time in high-producing exotic grassland, which is irrigated paddocks, basically. So that was quite an interesting find. So males, females, birds from both colonies, the majority of their time was in this grassland. And the key thing here is that they were using it more than it was available. So as a percentage, they were in that habitat a lot more than it was present around their colonies. And then kind of opposite to that, they were avoiding the low producing and depleted grasslands, which is kind of more short tussock and bare ground kind of habitats. For whatever reason, they were avoiding that. And then something else interesting we found, as far as I know, this is the first time this has been seen in black-fronted terns, is that some of the birds were spending their nights away from the breeding colonies, so they weren't hanging out the nest. So presumably one bird incubating or chick guarding, and the other one taking the night off, basically. And birds from the Cass colony had their nocturnal roost at the Cass River Delta at Lake Tekapo, which is just a couple of k's away. But birds from the other colony, from the Oho, were roosting 20 k's away at the top end of Lake Benmore at the Tekapo River Delta, sorry. So a lot further away. So that was quite interesting. And then the foraging range of these birds. So you can see there the average distance that the GPS points were from a colony. So 3.7 k's away, the birds from the Cass, and 5.9 for the Oho. So a bit further for the Oho. And the reasons for that, we think, are probably that roost that was a lot further away. So the birds are having to commute a lot further back and forth. And also those irrigated paddocks. If you remember that map of the GPS points before, there were some right next to the Cass colonies. Whereas at the Oho, they had to travel a bit further, and the weather grasslands were a bit more extensive by the Oho as well. And then overall, all the terns, they were spending 87% of their time within 10 k's of the breeding colonies. So most of their time relatively close, and then 99% within 25 k's. So almost all their time within that 25k radius. And for terns, for terns as a group of species overall, that's quite a small range. You see quite often ranges over 100 kilometres for terns. So that's interesting. But as always, there are outliers. And in our study, we had this outlier, which was a bird called Tern 2 from the Cass colony. It was a male who one day decided to go on a bit of a journey. And it started the 24-hour period, this blue marker at the start. It's come from the Cass colony over here, come up to the upper Rangitata, spent a lot of time there, then carried on to the upper Rakaia before coming all the way back again. So at its furthest point, 92 kilometres away in a straight line from the breeding colony. So a lot further than that average. And the other interesting thing, I suppose, about this is you can see it's going straight over mountain ranges here. It's not following the low ground a little bit at times, but it's going over the tops at other times, which is pretty cool. And then a heat map. So this is the Cass colony. The colony is in red in the middle there. And you can see that kind of just big amorphous blob around the colony, which is where they're spending all that time in, about a 10k radius out from the colony there. There's a wee bulge out to the side where the river delta is, and then a couple of secondary areas, a bit of farmland here, and then further up the river there. And this is the Oho colony, same kind of story, colony in the middle, more grassland extending out here. This is a bigger scale than the other map was, so more grassland here, some secondary areas, and then the big hotspot at the top end of Lake Benmore, which is the night roost over here. So a completely separate area, which is different to the Cass birds. And so for the migration, when the birds left, this bit didn't work quite as well as the breeding season, unfortunately. We had 34 birds with trackers, only 10 connected the next season with the hubs again. But that could be for any number of reasons. But the main one we think was the battery life of the trackers. You can see here when we're putting them on, they're quite flush with feathers, and so there's a bit of potential for the feathers to cover them. And then also in winter, there's just shorter daylight hours, less sun for the trackers to recharge. So less data here, but this is what it kind of turned out as. So this is all the post-breeding data. And almost all of it was from birds from the Oho colony, so biased that way, which is why there's lots of points around the colony here. And once they finished breeding, most of them kind of hung around for anywhere between a week and a couple of months using various river deltas and patches of farmland, not the colony itself. And then they either moved down the Waitaki to the lower Waitaki down here, or straight across land through here to the lower Rangitata with this big cluster of points here. And the main things we took from this pretty patchy and sporadic data is the hanging around the colony, using the lower Rangitata. Lots of the birds had points there, and these kind of two main corridors out of the basin. So yeah, main findings, that kind of interesting one, which goes against a lot of kind of conservation spiel that farmland is bad, but the terns were actually making a lot of use of that, which is interesting. And then the foraging range of the birds, so mainly within 10 Ks and then almost all within 25 Ks. And then those night roosts where the birds are spending their time away from the colony, and that's potentially something that can be actioned quite easily for conservation. You can trap river deltas around the colony, or an equivalent area for a colony which doesn't have deltas. So move that conservation not just from the colony but at other areas as well. And then the lower Rangitata as a post-breeding area. So the next steps, we've got quite a big data set overall. It's over 100,000 GPS points. So there's lots of other questions that can be asked besides the ones I have, just with the data we have already. And then looking at questions like, why are they using that grassland? Is it the most productive habitat nearby? And then knock-ons from that, it's not a natural habitat, obviously, these birds to be foraging in. So are there kind of any negative effects of that? Is it basically like fast food for the terns or something? And then work that I think has already started is doing these studies elsewhere. So what people might find, in the Ashley River or up in the Waiau might be completely different to what we found in the Mackenzie Basin. And then probably the most important thing is to get a year-round picture of this. So we've got a really nice complete data set for the breeding season, but as I mentioned, it gets quite sporadic and patchy, and there's several months in winter where we don't have any data at all. So it'd be really good to get a complete picture there, either find a way to improve the battery life, potentially raising the trackers or putting feather splitters on them, or catching birds in winter, which would be a bit more involved because they're obviously not returning to nests, so a bit trickier to catch them then. So yeah, a couple of quick acknowledgements for Adrian and James, my supervisors here at Lincoln, and Richard Maloney and Emma from DOC for helping out a lot. And then Core, Matthew and Luke, who did a lot of help with the data and genetics and that kind of thing here at Lincoln. And then Lincoln University, Forest and Birds NZ Canterbury and DOC for all contributing financially and in other ways to this project. Yeah, thanks. Any questions? No, we think it wasn't breeding because it did go back to the colony, but then it was kind of hanging around in various other places, so it wasn't tied to the colony anymore. So yeah, so that's another question. We just don't know if that's similar. There's often juvenile or immature birds that we've seen in the North Island when lots of other birds have already gone south, back down to the South Island. So potentially a bit of difference there. So another question to look at, yeah. No, that's all right. So in the Mackenzie Basin, it's previously a lot more bigger tussock grassland and also a lot more woody cover, totara and other species like that. But again, we need more study to do this kind of thing in an area where there is a bit more of a natural setting around the colony to see, do they ignore that and then fly further to irrigated paddocks, or do they do something different? Yeah, so we were just looking at where they were going. So again, another layer that needs to be done. So why the irrigated paddocks? What's the difference between the irrigated paddocks and that lower grassland? Probably more food in one than the other, yeah. Yeah, so we were just using our genetics to sex the birds, to tell which sex they were. So we didn't look into that aspect, but yeah, I don't know about the genetic distinction of different river systems, but as you say, they're pretty mobile birds, so I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit of mixing between rivers, yeah.